My friend Connor had been talking about this place for weeks, which was an old psychiatric hospital about 40 minutes outside our town in rural Ohio that had been closed since the early 90s and everyone in our county knew about. It was the kind of local landmark that collected stories the way old buildings collected water damage and exaggeration built up over 30 years until nobody could tell you what was actually true about the place and what was just mythology. Connor had done a lot of reading on it and said most of the buildings on the campus were still standing and that someone on a forum had posted photos from inside the main administration building 2 summers before, and the interior was largely intact. We decided we will be going in on a Friday night after Connor got off from work, which looking back was the specific combination of poor decisions that put us in a situation neither of us was prepared for. We went in after dark, with 2 flashlights with us, while nobody knew where we were, and with the specific overconfidence of 2 18-year-olds who had watched a lot of urban exploration videos and figured that qualified as preparation. The campus was large. That was the first thing that hit me when we parked on the service road behind the property and looked at it from outside the chain link fence. The forum photos had shown individual rooms and corridors, which made it feel manageable and finite. Standing outside the fence at 10 at night looking at the silhouettes of multiple large institutional buildings against the Ohio sky, the scale of it was different from what I had imagined. The main administration building was the largest structure, 4 stories of brick visible against the sky with its cupola at the top, and it sat at the center of the campus surrounded by smaller outbuildings connected by covered walkway structures. The whole thing was dark. No security lighting, no ambient glow from any occupied neighboring structure, just the buildings against the sky and the specific silence of a large property that had been sitting empty for 30 years. We got in through a section of fence at the back of the property where someone had already cut through the chain link and bent it back, which told us we were not the first people to come through that way. The path from the fence to the administration building was about 200 yards across open ground, which at night felt like more than 200 yards. We moved fast and stayed low for no real reason other than the instinct to not be visible on open ground in the dark. The administration building's main entrance was sealed with plywood, but the forum post had mentioned a side entrance on the north wall where the plywood had separated from its frame. We found it, and I will be honest with you, the moment I stepped inside was the moment some part of my brain that I should have been listening to told me this was a bad idea. The interior of the building had the specific quality that old institutional structures have when they have been sealed for decades, the compressed heaviness of air that has not been circulated, the smell of plaster and old wood and something underneath both of those things that I could not identify precisely, but that was organic and cold in a way that did not match the October temperature outside. We were on the ground floor corridor of the main wing. The corridor ran straight ahead of us, with closed doors on both sides, and the flashlight beam reaching maybe 30 feet before the darkness closed back in. The floor was intact but covered in debris, plaster dust and glass from the windows that had failed over the years, and our footsteps on it were louder than I wanted them to be. Connor was already photographing, moving his flashlight around and making the shadows jump in a way that made my heart rate accelerate more than I was willing to admit to him. The ground floor rooms were former administrative offices. We checked a few and they were empty. Chairs and desks long gone, just the rooms themselves with their patterned tile floors and their institutional paint peeling from the walls in strips. Old records had been left in some of the offices, stacks of folders on shelves, and Connor wanted to look at them, but I said do not touch anything, and he did not. We moved through the ground floor in maybe 20 minutes, and then Connor said he wanted to go up to the patient wards on the upper floors, and I said okay, because I was still pretending to myself that I was fine. The main stairwell was at the center of the building, and the stairs were solid. We went up to the second floor, and I immediately understood that this part of the building had a different character from the ground floor. The patient ward corridors were narrower, lower ceilinged, the rooms smaller and closer together. The rooms still had their metal bed frames in some cases, still had their institutional fixtures on the walls. It had the quality of a place that had been used by people in a specific kind of difficulty, which I know is just my brain applying context, but in a dark building at 10 at night with one flashlight between us at any given moment, the context was doing a lot of work. We were about halfway down the second floor ward corridor when Connor grabbed my arm and we both stopped. Somewhere above us, on the third or fourth floor, there was movement. Not ambiguous building sound. Not the structural settling that old buildings produce in temperature changes. Footsteps. Slow and deliberate, moving across the floor above us in a pattern that had the specific irregular rhythm of a person walking rather than anything structural. We stood in that corridor and listened to the footsteps move from the area roughly above our position toward the far end of the building above us and then stop. Neither of us said anything for what felt like a long time. Connor turned to me and I could see in the reflected flashlight glow that his face had changed from the interested expression he had been wearing since we came in to something more careful and more alert. I felt my own heart doing things it had not been doing 30 seconds before. I told him it was probably someone else who had come in the same way we did, another explorer or a couple of teenagers doing exactly what we were doing. He said probably. We stood there for another full minute listening and the building above us was quiet. Then Connor said he wanted to keep going, and I did not say what I actually wanted to say, which was that I wanted to leave, because I was 18, and I was not going to be the one who said it first. We continued down the ward corridor to the nursing station at the far end, which was a central room that overlooked the ward in both directions, through a large window that had lost its glass decades ago. The nursing station had a built-in counter still in place, and some shelving on the interior wall that still had a few items on it. A ceramic mug, some kind of binder with its cover degraded to nothing. I was looking at the shelving when the footsteps started again above us. This time, they were moving faster. Not running, but moving with the pace of someone who has a direction and is committed to it. And they were moving toward the stairwell. The same stairwell we had come up on. The same stairwell that was our exit. I looked at Connor and he looked at me, and for about 2 seconds we had the specific silent communication of two people who have simultaneously arrived at the same conclusion and are deciding whether to act on it. Then we acted on it. We went back down the ward corridor at a pace that I would describe as controlled urgency, which is the polite way of saying we were moving as fast as we could without committing fully to running. And as we reached the top of the stairwell, the footsteps above us reached the landing above us, and we could hear them on the stairwell. We went down the stairs fast enough that I almost lost my footing twice on the debris-covered steps. The ground floor corridor stretched ahead of us, and we covered it in a way that I do not have a precise memory of. Just the flashlight beam bouncing ahead of us and the side entrance appearing, and then the cold October air, and then we were outside and we were moving across the open ground toward the fence, and neither of us was doing anything like staying low or moving carefully. We went through the fence gap and got to Connor's car and sat in it for maybe 3 minutes before either of us said a word. Then Connor said, "What was that?" and I said, "I do not know." We drove back toward town, and the conversation we had in the car was the version of the conversation where both people are trying to be rational about something that felt like it did not have a rational version. Another explorer. Someone who lived on the property. Like a squatter. An animal on the upper floor, though we both knew the footstep pattern did not match any animal sound we had ever heard. We landed on squatter because it was the most plausible explanation for a person being in a building that other people had been documented accessing. There were forum posts about the campus going back years. It was not impossible that someone had been living there or using it regularly. A squatter who heard us come in on the ground floor and who came down the stairwell would account for everything we heard. We agreed this was the explanation, and we drove back to town, and I went home and did not sleep well. What I have thought about in the years since is the timing of the footsteps. They started when we were on the second floor, moved toward the far end of the building above us, and then when we were at the nursing station at the far end of the second floor ward, they reversed direction and moved toward the stairwell. The pattern of it had a specific quality that a squatter coming down to investigate after hearing us enter would not necessarily produce. A person coming down to investigate would come toward the sound, which was us on the ground floor initially. These footsteps first moved away from us and then back toward the stairwell only after we had moved from the center of the building to the far end. The timing was too specific for someone who was reacting to the sound of our entry. It had the timing of someone who knew where we were. I have not been back to the Westbrook campus, and I have not looked it up to see what its current status is. Connor moved to another state 2 years after this, and we lost touch, and I do not know if he thinks about it. I'm 26 now, and this happened when I was 17, and I have thought about it probably every few months since then, and have never posted about it anywhere because I did not know how to describe it in a way that would not sound made up. The farmhouse had been abandoned since before I was born. Everyone in our small town in rural Indiana knew about it. It was about 3 miles outside the town, and you could see it from the main road if you knew where to look. This dark, weathered structure sitting in the middle of a field with the tree line behind it and the county fence running along the road. The fence had no trespassing signs posted on it every 100 feet or so, and most people respected that. Not because they were afraid of the legal consequences, but because the place had a reputation that 30 years of local storytelling had made genuinely intimidating. Stories about what had happened to the family that owned it before the county acquired it. Stories about people who had gone in but came out acting different. The kind of local mythology that accumulates around abandoned places in small towns where there is not much else to talk about. Marcus and I had been talking about going in for most of that summer. We were 17, bored, and at the specific point in a person's development where the gap between the fear of something and the desire to prove you are not afraid of it has narrowed to almost nothing. We drove out on a Saturday night in late August. Marcus drove his older brother's car that he was not supposed to have, and we parked it on the shoulder of the county road about a quarter mile from the fence and walked the rest of the way. We had 2 flashlights and a phone with a camera between us and nothing else in the way of preparation. We went over the fence rather than under it, which was harder than I had imagined given that the posts were still solid and the chain link was tight. We landed on the other side in the field grass and crouched for a moment listening. The field was quiet. The night was warm and still, and the kind of dark that rural Indiana gets on a cloudy August night when there is no moon and the nearest streetlight is miles away. The farmhouse was about 400 yards across the field, dark in every visible window, looking like exactly what it was. Marcus wanted to approach from the back where the tree line was close to the building and where we would be less visible from the road for the last portion of the approach. We went along the fence line to the back of the property first and then cut across the remaining field toward the rear of the house. The grass was tall enough to brush against our shins, and the ground was uneven in the specific way of farmland that has not been maintained in decades, the furrow patterns still present but softened by years of wild growth. We did not use the flashlights on the approach because we did not want to be visible from the road. The farmhouse was larger up close than it had appeared from the road. The wood siding had gone almost black with age, and the windows on the lower floor were intact but dark with the accumulated grime of decades. The upper windows had lost most of their glass, and the openings were dark rectangles in the black wood. The structure looked stable. No obviously compromised walls, no visible roof collapse, which was something I had been thinking about on the walk across the field because the stories about this place included at least one version that involved someone going through a floor in the upper level. We found the rear entrance, which was a door at the back of the house that Marcus pushed against and which swung inward with the specific sound of a door that has not moved in a long time. We went in with our flashlights on. The interior smell hit me immediately. Old wood and dust, and something underneath that I did not identify right away. Something faintly sweet and cold that I associated later and still associate with the smell of old wax, like candles that have been burning in a closed space for a long time and have been extinguished, and the scent has settled into everything. I noticed it and did not say anything about it because I could not immediately explain why it was there, and not saying things you cannot explain felt like the right policy in that building on that night. The ground floor was a farmhouse layout, a kitchen at the back where we entered, a main room beyond that, a short hallway with 2 closed doors. The kitchen still had its furniture, a table with 2 chairs, a counter with old equipment that had been sitting in the same position for 30 or more years. Marcus swept his flashlight around and I watched the doorways. We moved through the kitchen into the main room, and I noticed that the floor here was solid and quiet, which surprised me. I had expected the floor of a house this age and this abandoned to move and sound under my weight, and it did not. It was completely solid and quiet. We checked the 2 closed doors in the hallway. One opened to a small bathroom, the other was a bedroom with a metal bed frame, a dresser with a cracked mirror, and on the dresser a collection of small objects I did not examine closely because I did not want to spend more time than necessary with my flashlight pointed in one direction when I could not see what was behind me. Marcus went to the staircase at the far end of the main room and looked up. I came and looked with him. The stairs went up to the upper floor, and the upper landing was visible at the top in the combined range of our flashlights. Marcus started up and I followed. The upper floor was a hallway with 4 doors, all closed. The hallway floor was different from the ground floor. It moved slightly under our weight and produced the low creak of old wood that had been exposed to weather through the damaged windows, not dangerous but present. We moved carefully, and Marcus started at the first door on the left. He opened it onto an empty room. A former bedroom. Nothing in it, the window on the far wall missing its glass and the night air moving slightly through the opening. The second door opened onto another empty room, this one with some collapsed shelving and the debris of whatever had been stored there. We were at the third door when I noticed the light. I noticed it before Marcus did because I was facing back toward the staircase while he was looking at the third door, doing the specific thing of keeping an eye on the direction we had come from that I always did in unfamiliar spaces. The light was coming from under the fourth door, the door at the end of the hallway. A warm light, not bright, the quality of candlelight rather than electric light, visible as a faint amber line under the gap at the bottom of the door. I put my hand on Marcus's arm and he stopped. I pointed at the floor under the fourth door without saying anything, and he looked and saw it and went still. We stood in that hallway for what I think was about 2 minutes, just looking at the light and listening. The hallway was silent. Whatever was producing the light in that room was producing it without any accompanying sound that we could hear. Marcus and I looked at each other and had the same silent conversation we had been having since we were kids, the one that uses eye contact and expression rather than words. He made a gesture toward the fourth door. I made a gesture toward the stairs. He made the door gesture again more decisively. I let out a breath, and we moved slowly toward the fourth door. Marcus reached it first, and I stood slightly behind him and to the side. He reached out slowly and put his hand on the door handle. He looked at me once more, and I gave him the smallest nod I think I have ever given anyone. He turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room was larger than the other rooms, maybe the master bedroom, and in its center there was a group of people kneeling on the floor in a rough circle. I counted 3 of them in the first instant, 3 adults, positioned on their knees facing inward toward the center of the circle where several candles were burning on the floor. The candle light was what we had seen under the door. The people were completely still. They were not speaking. They were not moving. In the moment that the door swung open and the hinges produced the sound that filled the entire upper floor of that house, not one of the 3 people in that room moved or turned toward the door or in any way acknowledged that the door had just been opened. I want to be precise about that because it is the part that has stayed with me more than anything else from that night. We opened the door. The door was loud. We were standing in the open doorway with our flashlights, and the 3 people in that room did not move. They stayed on their knees with their backs to us and their faces toward the center of the circle, and they were as still as the furniture in the bedroom we had checked downstairs. I do not know how long we stood there looking at them. Marcus has told me since that he thinks it was about 5 seconds. In my memory it is longer than that, but I know that memory in high adrenaline situations is not reliable. What broke it was Marcus taking a step backward, and that step communicating to my body that moving was an option, and then we were both backing down the hallway toward the stairs. We did not turn around until we hit the top of the staircase. We went down the stairs as fast as we could without the stairs giving way under us, which they did not, and through the main room and the kitchen and out the back door and across the field. We ran most of the way back to the fence, climbed over it, and got to Marcus's brother's car, and Marcus drove us back toward town without either of us talking for several minutes. When we did talk, it was in the specific way I described at the beginning, two people trying to find the rational version. People using the abandoned farmhouse for a gathering of some kind, some group that met there for whatever reason and had been doing it long enough to know how to access the building. There were explanations for it that were not alarming. But the stillness of those three people when the door opened was not something either of us could fit inside the rational version. A person who hears an unexpected sound in a quiet room turns toward it. Every person, every time. It is not a choice, it is a reflex. The three people in that circle had not turned, they had not moved. They had not given any indication that they were aware of us, despite the sound of the door and our flashlights and our presence in the doorway. I have a version of it in my head from that night that is detailed enough that the external view has nothing to add. The 4 closed doors in the upstairs hallway. The amber light under the 4th one. The 3 still shapes on their knees in the candlelight. The silence that answered the sound of a door being opened in an empty farmhouse. I do not know what those 3 people were doing in that room on that night, and I made a decision a long time ago to be completely at peace with not knowing. Some answers would be reassuring and some would not, and I have no way of knowing which kind this one would be, so I have left it where it is. In the dark upstairs room of an old Indiana farmhouse, with the candles burning and the people kneeling and the door swinging open to a silence that should not have been possible.